Hard Talk has come to Geneva, currently hosting the UN's World Health Assembly, to meet the world's most influential philanthropist. Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, is currently reckoned to be the world's second richest man. His Gates Foundation spends roughly $3 billion a year on global health projects. His drive and his ambition transformed the world of computing. Can he deliver similar transformational change in the worldwide battle against deadly disease? Bill Gates, welcome to Hard Talk. You've applied an awful lot of money and brain power to the effort to eradicate some of the world's most infectious diseases. Is it fair to say it's proving perhaps harder than you imagined?
Well, actually, most of our focus is reducing childhood death and not having children be so sick. And if you go back 50 years ago, over 20 million children died a year. Now that's down under 9 million, even though there's a lot more children under 5. So there's a lot of success here. Very few diseases do you go for eradication. Smallpox is eradicated. We're in the process of eradicating polio and guinea worm. But overwhelmingly, what you're driven by is that these diseases not only kill children, but they don't let their brain develop. And so both that individual and that whole country is devastated. In many countries, up to half the kids have had terrible health events that hold back their potential.
But it's clear that you see vaccines as one of the keys to this. You've called it, you hope, the decade of vaccines, this particular decade we began in 2010. When one looks at your efforts to find vaccines that will really work against malaria, against HIV/AIDS, I come back to this point that it is not easy. It is extraordinarily difficult, isn't it?
Certainly. The first thing is we want to get the vaccines that rich kids take all the time and get them to the poorest kids who actually suffer from the diseases over 100 times as much. There you have to get the prices down, you have to raise money, and then we also invest in the invention of new vaccines. We've got a malaria vaccine in a late-stage trial. We've brought a lot of new energy and brilliant minds to these vaccine inventions, and I'm very optimistic that we'll make breakthroughs.
You said here in Geneva, quote, "People are hungry for visionary leaders who not only promise a better future, but deliver on that promise." Do you feel the world's politicians are letting you down right now?
Well, the world's politicians have immense budget pressures, and so I'm impressed with the people who take this aid to the poorest, where you're literally saving lives for less than 1% of what's spent on health in the rich countries, where they're able to preserve and in some cases even grow that commitment.
Yes, but, and I'm looking at the latest OECD figures, which suggest that since the grand declarations of Gleneagles 2005, the Making Poverty History campaign, and the declaration that, again, from the UN, that 0.7% of national income in the rich world would be devoted to aid and development, it's not happening. And they reckon that there's a deficit of at least 19 billion on the promises made.
Well, Gleneagles was a fantastic event. Far more aid was forthcoming because of that event than would have happened without it. But it's definitely true that not every country fulfilled its pledge. Italy is sort of the extreme case where not only did they not make increases, they actually reduced their spending. But on the other side, there's many countries, including the UK, which actually are coming through. And by the 2013 timeline, they'll be up at that very impressive 0.7%.
Sure. I mean, a country you didn't mention was the United States, which is going to fall way short of that 0.7%. And can you understand it when people in the United States say, well, Bill Gates, we're really impressed with the efforts you're making, and we hear your call, but frankly, when our own government is burdened with debt, when our own economy is in really bad shape, unemployment very high,
we don't want our government to use taxpayer dollars to boost the amount of international aid that's provided.
If these poor people lived nearby, you would open your own wallet and help them. And so anytime people are aware at how effective this money is, they're very supportive of it. Now, it can disappear with all the other issues out there, but for these effective programs, I've never run into anybody who understood what it's all about who wasn't very willing to have the money spent. The percentage of the government budget that's foreign aid is very, very small. And the U.S. does need to increase what it's done. It's made increases to get up to the level it's at now, but it's a country that could do a lot more.
Have you said that to Barack Obama yourself?
Actually, he made a campaign commitment to double the foreign aid, which would have gotten us up to a very strong level. Now, with the various budget negotiations, there'll be an increase, but nowhere near the doubling. So I think he's disappointed by that, as am I.
I'm intrigued by the sort of overlap between your life in tech, where, you know, you pushed the boundaries of what was possible and you were always intrigued by sort of looking for the next idea, and now your life in sort of the technology of public health. You know, you've talked about, for example, thermostable vaccines that can be delivered around the world without the need for refrigeration. It clearly would be a huge breakthrough to get them to the most difficult parts of the world. Some time ago, you suggested that that was very close. But it hasn't happened, despite all of the money you've put into R&D. Why?
Actually, we didn't put too much into that because the complexity of getting everything reapproved would be very tough. The actual cost of keeping the vaccines cold as you put them out to delivery is usually about 10% of running the vaccination system. Our current idea is actually a super thermos, which would keep the vaccine cold even without electricity or without any energy. You just put a little ice into this thermos and that should work. So using science to make things simple, make them work in places with no electricity, not much training, no repair capability, that absolutely is something that we think is critically important.
Have you ever pondered some of the potential dangers of the massive philanthropic sort of activity you're undertaking? Because I think people do see some dangers as well as some huge upsides.
That less children will die?
No, that wouldn't be the danger. The danger would be that, first of all, there's perhaps a basic lack of accountability. I mean, you're a private foundation in the end. And second, that maybe you are doing some of the work that ought to be done, maybe would be best done by public authorities, governments.
Well, certainly the responsibility for taking care of their people rests with the government. The idea that there's a better seed for these farmers, that's just a tool that allows them to do that job better. You know, there's a disease of wheat that no country has spent on. It's kind of a global problem that we've had to step in and spend now about 80 million on this wheat rust. And so there are things that just fall between the cracks. But the design of these health programs is to get the cost of the vaccine down so that governments are absolutely self-sufficient. You know, we make sure that low-cost manufacturing is there so there's no ongoing dependence and the government can do the job.
The Lancet magazine a couple of years ago looked very closely at what you do, and it had a lot of praise for many of the projects you worked on, but it also said there was a danger that some of what you did was run, and they used the word whimsy, was somewhat whimsical, pet projects that you were particularly interested in. They said there was also a question of accountability. They would like to see more independent and outside voices on your board, or at least clearly listened to by your board. Did you pay any heed to that?
Well, certainly the projects we picked, there's a very clear criteria of taking the diseases that kill the most children, cause the most sickness. That's absolutely how we prioritize things. And we show exactly the process we go through in terms of setting up these different budgets. We do have a great Global Health Advisory Board with smart people on it. Our development group's got a great advisory board. Those people serve without pay, which is a very nice thing. we're trying to drive at very high speed. So there is a difference between us and, say, large committees. There's certainly a role for both, but we have a bias towards action. We're very open about what we do, and the kind of dialogue created by that Lancet article we welcome.
And when some in the NGO community worry, for example, about your embrace of genetically modified foodstuffs, I mean, you've encouraged, with seed corn money, you've encouraged scientists to look at creating a sort of more nutritious banana, a more nutritious cassava. When people worry about the direction that sort of research is going in, do you listen to that?
Oh, absolutely. Whenever you create a new drug or a new seed, it's very important that every country have a regulatory process that says, are the benefits of this drug or seed, do they far outweigh the potential problems? And so no one takes a new drug, whether we invent it or a pharmaceutical company invents it and takes it immediately. You go through a very strict process. Likewise for new seeds. We've been a big funder of regulatory expertise in these African countries. And they'll get to make the decision.
Will they really?
If there's a seed, well, those countries are sovereign, so I don't know who else would make the decision. When they get a seed that allows farmers not to starve, where you have climate change coming from the rich world, and you have a drought-resistant seed, they can decide, are the downsides of that, the upsides appropriate? And some countries will decide yes, some will decide no. Drug authority, drug approval, seed approval is never in the hands of anybody but a sovereign entity.
I want